Well, actually, before we start with the first slide, I would like to introduce you to the work that we do as the World Commission on Protected Areas through an inspiring video that we produce for the IUCN World Conservation Congress in 2016 in Hawaii.
Once the world was a protected area, and human beings were a little sprinkle on a thriving Earth. We have slowly but surely changed that equation. Now we've got a sprinkle of nature on a human-dominated Earth.
For the future of nature, for the future of humankind, it is absolutely critical that we protect large areas of the land, of the sea. How much of nature must we protect? Well, quite frankly, all of it. We must treat all of it with respect.
The world is embattled, it's in crisis with climate change, with increasing population and consumption, and the destruction of biodiversity.
We have the capacity now to destroy on a level that is unprecedented in the history of humankind.
All human beings since their evolution have always related to the natural world, and it is stunning and wonderful, and our protected areas are usually where we keep that wonder and beauty and wildness.
On n'a pas encore trouvé de meilleur système de conservation que la création d'aires protégées. La création d'aires protégées, c'est quelque chose de radical.
The World Commission on Protected Areas is the world's largest global network of protected area specialists.
It's the largest partnership on the planet to help safeguard and protect the planet.
The Commission members are everywhere, and the protected areas are everywhere, in all the countries of the world and in every type of situation. Can we find some formula that unites all of them?
WCPA brings ideas, hopes it solves problems.
Our primary mission at the moment is to expand protected areas and improve both the quantity and the quality. The WCPA is a volunteer network. People put in an enormous amount of time and effort. I see it as a family.
Uno de los principales roles que creo que la juventud va a tener en el futuro es traer ese mensaje de la necesidad moral de proteger los recursos naturales, porque lo que nos estamos acabando hoy no son solo nuestros recursos, sino los recursos de las generaciones venideras.
So it's fundamental, I would say, not just important to have a representation of and actually involvement, engagement and empowerment of young professionals within the Commission. The next generation of conservation leaders will have to deal with incredible and really hard to deal with environmental challenges, and it's our responsibility to invest in capacity building and leadership training so we can prepare really the next generation of conservation leaders to deal with this challenge.
next 10 years are the most important in the next 10,000 years, because we're right on the line of either winning, making peace with nature, or losing because we have waited too long. I believe it's not too late.
So I hope you enjoy, as I do every time that I watch this video. A lot of emotion comes to my mind and to my spirit, because at the end, it's true, as Kathy said, WCPA is also a family, and our priority, as mentioned by Kathy, that we will hear in a couple of minutes, is to expand protected areas in terms of quality and quantity. So our objective for this summit as well, but in general as the work of WCPA, is to have at least 30% of all land and sea effectively protected by 2030. So this is also a resolution that was passed by IUCN in 2016 in Hawaii, related to the ocean. This means this is the least that we can do to safeguard nature for future generation, and to safeguard nature in terms of productivity and functionality. We need a well-protected, well-managed, and well-governed system of protected areas and also of conserved areas. This will allow us to halt biodiversity loss, but also to contribute as natural system to combating climate change. So this is the objective as well of this session, to reinforce this important message. And this session will have also another huge pillar, which is the engagement of the next generation of conservation leaders. And with this, we can move to the next slide, because it all started in 2003, when at the World Parks Congress, the former South African President Nelson Mandela was addressing the IUCN World Parks Congress in Durban, and he challenged conservationists to engage more meaningfully with young people, to build their capacity, to provide leadership training opportunity, to channel their enthusiasm and inspiration into the global challenge of sustaining life on Earth, and by doing so, safeguarding its most beautiful and inspiring places while respecting and building social equity. So this was a fundamental message that WCPA fully embraced and carried forward, and was embraced also by IUCN. In fact, in 2016 at the World Conservation Congress, it was strongly reinforced the need to involve, support, empower, and engage with the next generation of conservation leaders by recognizing them as important stakeholders and actors in the creation for a better future of our planet, and making their engagement a priority to address current and future challenge. And this leads us to the Global Youth Summit of today. And we hope that this commitment will continue, and also will in some way become a reality also within IUCN in terms of having reference there for the engagement of and involvement, meaningful involvement of the next generation of conservation leaders. But another big topic that we will cover during this session are protected areas and the fundamental role that protected areas play as our life support system. So they give us many services by conserving biodiversity, by absorbing CO2, by protecting us from natural hazard, by providing us with food, with the water that we drink, but also with the cultural services like opportunity for recreation and spiritual values, of course. So they not only address the biodiversity protection, but they, if well managed, they can become really drivers for economic and social development and a key tool to build a just society. So we will discover a little bit more about this with our first speaker, who is Dan Lafoli. He's a great champions of WCPA and of marine protected areas globally. Is obviously a well-respected world leader on marine conservation. He's a scientist, a communicator, an explorer, a producer, a conservationist. He's the master of PowerPoint as well, so you will see his great presentation. He's obviously the Marine Vice Chair for the World Commission on Protected Areas, but also Senior Advisor on Marine Science and Conservation at the Global Marine and Polar Program of IUCN. He has almost 35 years of experience and has been responsible for the creation of many global, European and UK, where he's from, partnership for marine conservation, alliance, and a framework to establish marine protected areas. So I will let Dan present about the importance of scaling up not just quantity but also quality of ocean protection. And so we will cover the important topic of management effectiveness.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria Sole. Can you both hear me and see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. Well, thank you for those words of introduction. I'm going to be talking about quantity and quality of ocean protection, but where I really want to start is about the criticality of why we need to protect the ocean. And I think COVID-19 has brought home to us our unhealthily close association with nature and how we need to do more. And the ocean should lie at the heart of recovery plans from COVID-19 to get our world in more balance. And let me explain why. And the best way to do this is to look back through perhaps the ultimate window system that we have available on the International Space Station, the cupola window system. And whilst none of us have the luxury of looking through that, we all know what the lucky astronauts will see, which is our world, our home, blue, finite, hanging in the dark void of space. The challenge when we think of how we promote recovery, how we get our world back in better balance, is perhaps we've forgotten just how much of our world is ocean dominated. Now, what I'm going to show you is a visualization, which someone did recently, which I've animated, to try and bring this home to you about how much of the surface of our planet is ocean. So if you think of Russia, the largest country, that just covers about 3.34% of the surface. All the rest of the land is only 30%. Add in Antarctica, you add in another 2.75%. And when you start to add in the oceans, the territorial waters, including the exclusive economic zone, is some 27%. And then the areas outside the jurisdiction of any single country, the so-called international waters or high seas, occupies some 43% of the surface area of our planet. Now, that in a way shows that we are an ocean world, but it doesn't explain for me enough why it's so critically important that that blue bit is much better protected. And to do that, what we need to do is talk about the most important equation that is about all our futures, and it's the most important equation that none of us are really talking about. And that is something called the Earth's energy imbalance. So if you view this circle as the Earth, and you think of the energy coming in from the sun, it causes heat, which is what causes our seasons. If we are accumulating less heat, so we're emitting heat out more than we're bringing in, then we have a negative imbalance. But as if we are doing now, we not only have the energy from the sun, the heat from the sun, but we have the heating from all our activities from greenhouse gases, then you are accumulating heat. And the question is, where does that heat go? What is functionally trying to keep our world in balance? What are the most valuable parts of our world that we need to really cherish and protect? And if I now repeat the diagram that you've just seen, but by functional importance of the different parts of our world, and bear in mind, by the way, I've had to build this because there's no illustration really freely available to show this, that 30% for land shrinks to just 5%. Only 5% of the excess heat we're creating is going on the land area. The atmosphere is only containing 2%. If you think of a room at your house and it's very cold outside, you switch off the heating, the room rapidly cools. Air is not good at holding heat. And so we lose heat from the atmosphere. It doesn't contain much heat. Ice is taking up about 3%. But if you think of the amount of headlines you see at the moment, it's ice and polar ice and Antarctica and glaciers that is really dominating it. 90% of the heat to keep our world in balance is going in the ocean. About 52% has already been absorbed between 0 and 700 meters depth. 700 to 2000 meters, 30% of the heat we've generated, and below 2000 meters, 8%. I think it's quite chilling that even the deepest part of the ocean is absorbing more heat than the land and atmosphere combined at the moment. And it is a massive amount of heat. It's measured in zettajoules. A zettajoule is a 10 with 21 zeros behind it. So people have actually likened it to the energy released by atomic bombs. And at the moment, the energy going into the system is into the ocean is about 3 to 6 Hiroshima-style atomic bombs worth of energy per second. And in case anyone wants to pull me up on that in the questions, I do mean per second. So it is a massive amount of heat, and therefore we have a massive debt to the ocean, because it's the ocean that is trying to keep our world in balance. But there's a couple of points to mention in relation to this. The first is about the emissions that we're putting up that is causing the atmospheric heating. This is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the last 20,000 years. And you see this peak on the right-hand side that some have dubbed the Anthropocene, the unnatural epoch of life on Earth. The problem is the speed with which we're doing it. So since I started these presentations, I now have to add a bit onto the top of the graph. This is the amount of carbon dioxide measured at Hawaii a couple of Saturdays ago, actually. But it still doesn't bring home to you how quickly we're changing our world and why protecting the environment must go hand in hand with emission reductions. So put on this graph the concentration on the day you were born. So I'm 58, and that's where I am on the graph. So in my lifetime, 2/3 of that spike has occurred. That is how rapidly we are starting to change the very nature of life on Earth. And of course, for the ocean, which you will now know we're highly dependent on and we need to protect to keep it in as good a condition as possible, All this comes on top of decades and decades of use and abuse of the ocean, out of sight, out of mind. And there's a repeatable formula when you look at the ocean, how it used to be, and the ocean we're probably going to get, or we are getting. First came fishing, pollution, mechanical habitat destruction, introductions, and noise. And they don't act individually, they act together, synergistic effects, causing real problems to the ocean world and driving the decline of biodiversity in what is 9/10 of the living space for species on the planet. Then, of course, comes climate change impacts. And the problem with that is they are at such a large scale, they're almost pulling the rug out from underneath our efforts to deal with the first 5 of those that you might call our, if you like, our traditional management problems. And so you're getting synergistic and overarching effects. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, a year ago, almost exactly, our world stopped. At one point, 2/3 of the world's population was under stay-at-home orders as our unnaturally close association with nature bit as COVID-19 spilled over into the human population. But with all the darkness and problems that brings, also brings opportunities as people think about how we can grow back greener, smarter, more equitably, more resiliently in the future. And if we're going to do that, we need to look at how we're protecting the ocean, both in quality and quantity. And of course, the question is, how well have we done so far? So governments have a target of 10%, and this is the official map that is used to show progress from the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, UNEP's World Conservation Monitoring Centre in Cambridge. And in blue are the marine protected areas. In yellow, you'll see them around Canada, are the first OECMs, other effective area-based measures. And Kathy, who's going to speak after me, will be explaining a lot more about them. But the problem with this is not just the scale, but how we're doing it and what we're doing. So we've protected about 7.65, 7.7%, nearly 28 million square kilometers in nearly 18,500 marine protected areas. But when you look at the quality of protection and what is implemented, probably only 2.6% of that is in fully or highly protected zones, the places where we get recovery. And a lot of it is actually in lower levels of protection or even unimplemented. So the question is, how much should we protect? Well, I'm going to show on this graph a pictorial representation of what's been going off over the decades. The vertical axis is the amount people are talking about. The colors are, red is any type of marine protected area from the status quo through to full protection, and blue represents high levels of protection that stimulate recovery. And we have on the horizontal axis the years. And what we've seen through the World Parks Congress, both the Durban World Parks Congress in 2003 and the Sydney World Parks Congress, is civil society, civil conservation society and scientists saying we need to protect much more. Durban World Parks Congress, 20 to 30% was what we were talking about. By the time we got to Sydney World Parks Congress, it was at least 30%, and that's where the at least 30% comes from. But even then, E.O. Wilson's work looking at half Earth was starting to bite, with people saying, you know, to get the world back in balance, we're going to need a lot more. Now, contrast that to the government's position over the decades. And to do that, we have to go back to 1983 to the Bali World Parks Congress. So long ago that was the meeting that IUCN used to adopt the term protected area. Before that, we called them parks. And at that meeting, there was a grand plan to scale up protection from 5 or 6% to 10%. And we know since then on land, the formal targets have gone up to 17%. For the ocean, the ambition was, well, not ambitious. In the medical world, if you see a line like that, it's called flatlining and your patient is dead. And basically the issue has been no additional ambition until very recently, until this super year for marine, where many countries are joining together, looking at this going, do you know what? We need to move on. We need to protect at least 30%. And a few comments about what we should do. So how much should we then overall protect? Well, as Sylvia Earle said in the film at the start, we need to protect all of it. How much of your heart would you protect? A bit of it? Or do you value your whole heart? And the ocean is the heart of the planet. And we need to do this in different ways. We need to protect at least 30% in full protection. We're going to have to do more for climate compromised areas using other types of marine protected areas, other mechanisms. And we mustn't forget the remainder, the other 50%, that really needs to deliver accountable and documented sustainability. Otherwise, we will create islands of hope in a sea of despair. When we think of the 30%, as I mentioned, it came from the Parks Congress in Sydney in 2014. And science has moved on, concern has moved on, loss of biodiversity and climate disruption has moved on. And we now know, and this is a paper we did in Parks in November 2019, that at least 30% is a minimum. What we also know is that nature is a blind spot in global economics, and we need to be doing far more to value the goods and services, the sorts of things I've talked about, so we realize the importance of scaling up. The good news is we have clear definitions for marine protected areas. We have a lot of guidance produced in multiple language to help practitioners, to help agencies, to help governments in taking the actions that they need to and should be taking. In 2018, we created something called the MPA standards. So there's a lot of guidance and material that's been officially approved by the members, the global members of IUCN. And so this makes it easy in French, English, and Spanish to see what are the standards, what are the things we need to be doing if we're going to take the best action to protect that life-giving ocean. It's about the quality and it's about the type of protection. For the quality of protection, if you think of the red list as our efforts to stop things going extinct, species going extinct, the green list is the road to recovery. And many countries are now joining this to look at meeting standards for best practice in area-based conservation. For the ocean, it is about not just the effectiveness of management, but the type of management. And I'll show you a brief animation here. On the right-hand side is an area inside a highly protected, marine protected area. And on the left is the area outside. And this is what high levels of protection do. You get colonization and growth. You get abundance. You get more things in areas that you properly protect rather than areas that are called protected but are just the status quo. You get greater diversity. You get greater spillover. And the bit I love with this animation is I'm going to speed up biology because you get greater dispersal. And there arrives a fish and another fish and another fish. But the point is, it's not just about the quality of management, it's the type of protection as well. And we're now working across many organizations around the world to try and get a common language to reflect the science on the levels of protection from fully protected through to minimally protected, and also the stages of establishment from just committing to do something to actually the places that really count, where we're actively managing them. These are the sorts of places that are getting onto the green list now. So let me complete this presentation by going back to the start, to this map. If those are the sorts of things that we're doing, we need to do better in how we view our progress. So what's the problem with this view? This is the official map tracking progress for governments around the world. Well, the problem is if I show you in black and white, that map, you don't get any more value whether it's in color or black and white because it's only showing the presence. If we have common language, we have better approaches and we evolve our approaches to marine conservation, we can start to think in color. We can start to see where the areas of recovery are. We can start to see where countries need more help. And this would enable us to track and report in color. It's a difference between an old black and white Kodak photo and digital color, if you like. And we have the ability to do this if we have the will to do this. And perhaps what we also need to do, you might not have spotted, but the view that officially tracks progress actually really does disfavor to polar areas. So why don't we add the rest of the map in and see the whole picture? And perhaps with enlightened self-interest, we might actually take an ocean perspective, because it's the thing that is looking after all our futures. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for this inspiring presentation and really illuminating as well. You know, you have provided us with a lot of information, but also a very strong argument for ocean protection. So thank you very much. So now we move on, because we, as Dan mentioned, we don't have just protected areas, but we have other tools for conservation. And to talk about the other effective conservation-based measure, we have the chair of WCPA, Kathy McKinnon. She has spent a lifetime working for conservation and protected area issues globally, and including the time as the lead biodiversity specialist at the World Bank. She is an IUCN counselor and also served as on the boards of the Botanic Garden Conservation International, UNEP, WCMC, from who the images that then show us and the map were taken, and the Coral Triangle Center. In 2018, she was awarded the Midori Prize for Biodiversity from the IUCN Environmental Foundation of Japan and the Secretariat of Convention of Biological Diversity for the outstanding contribution to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use at local and global levels. So please join me in welcoming Kathy McKinnon. And Kathy, over to you.
Thanks, Maria Serle. Well, it's a long time since I was a young professional, but ever since I was, I've been a member of WCPA. And WCPA does many activities, but I want to talk today about other effective area-based conservation measures, which we call OECMs, because this is an area where through the work of the Commission, we had tremendous input into international policy. So OECMs are really interesting because they represent a significant step forward in the formal recognition of conservation happening outside protected areas, or the protected areas that we're currently reporting. And this all goes back to the Conference of the Parties in Nagoya in 2010, when the parties agreed to 20 IHE targets. And the one that's of interest to protected areas is IHE target 11. But it doesn't just talk about ecologically well-managed and equitably managed and well-connected systems of protected areas. It also talks about other effective area-based conservation measures. And these are the OECMs. So back in 2010, parties realized there were areas where we were getting effective biodiversity conservation, but they weren't recognized officially as protected areas. It wasn't until 2018, however, that the parties to the convention agreed on what other effective area-based conservation measures should be. In Egypt, in 2018 at COP14, we agreed to the definition of OECMs and criteria for them. They should have a significant biodiversity value, be complementary to protected areas, contribute to connectivity of protected area networks. There could be some low-level sustainable human activities within those areas, but there must be clear benefits to biodiversity conservation. And
with the expectation that all protected areas were effective in delivering biodiversity outcomes, and we've just heard from Dan that actually that isn't quite so, it was decided that the delivery of biodiversity outcomes from these OECMs should be comparable. They should be equally important and complementary to protected areas. And they should be supported by measures to enhance the governance capacity of their legitimate governance authorities to support and sustain long-term biodiversity outcomes. And we should be able to document that in a transparent manner to make sure that we're maintaining those outcomes. So this is the definition that was agreed in COP14. And as you can see, it's a geographically defined area other than a protected area. So protected areas and OECMs cannot overlap. They're separate but complementary. And the most important part of the statement is effective. It's all in the name. They have to be effective in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in situ conservation of biodiversity. And they may also, of course, protect other ecosystem functions and services, cultural and spiritual values, and other locally relevant values. But the important thing is biodiversity outcomes. Now, there's a difference between protected areas and OECMs. Protected areas should have a primary conservation objective. Their core function is to promote the in situ conservation of biodiversity. OECMs should deliver the effective in situ conservation of biodiversity, regardless of their primary management objectives. And this matters because there'll be some areas that really have an intention to conserve biodiversity, and there'll be others where it's almost by accident. So if we look at areas that have ancillary conservation, these will be areas that for whatever reason have very little disturbance and good biodiversity outcomes. They might be sacred sites, they might be training areas used by the military, they may be protected shipwrecks that are protected as war graves, so there's no disturbance. Then there are areas where we get what we call secondary conservation. These are areas which will have very low impact use. They might be high biodiversity forests that are really protected because of their watershed values, but we're getting biodiversity values as well. They might be locally managed marine areas, which again have high biodiversity, but are managed for sustainable use with low impact by local communities. Or they might have a primary conservation objective. That could be indigenous and community conserved areas or privately governed areas that have a primary conservation objective. Now, those areas may not be recognized or reported as protected areas. You may not see them coming through in those figures that were in the film and that Dan showed for how much of the world is officially protected, according to the databases held by UNEP WCMC. These areas are delivering effective conservation, but the governance authority, and that may be an indigenous community, may not want the areas officially reported by governments. Or there may be areas managed by private companies where the government just simply doesn't recognize them as protected areas. So for instance, in Indonesia, there are ecosystem restoration forest areas that are officially listed as protection forests, but no longer have any logging allowed, and are really important for protecting lowland rainforest in Sumatra, and are now managed by a consortium of NGOs with a specific conservation objective. These would qualify as an OECM. If you want to know more about some of the types of OECMs, we do have a special issue of Parks available that lists some case studies. So all OECMs must deliver in situ conservation of a significant biodiversity. And we're looking at the CBD definition of biodiversity. That's conservation of ecosystems and natural habitats and the maintenance and recovery of viable populations of species in their natural surroundings. Now you've heard from Dan and from Maria Sole about how we now have more ambitious targets post-2020. We're looking to get 30% of the planet protected. That's at least 30% of the ocean, at least 30% of terrestrial habitats, and at least 30% of freshwater habitats. So that's quite an ask. Although we saw the latest protected planet figures earlier, in fact, there's a time lag in government's reporting, and very few OECMs have been reported at all. So the news is not all bad about achieving the 17% and 10% targets by 2020. We probably have made those targets just, and we need to encourage governments to now go do much, much more. They have to be much more ambitious. And recognizing OECMs will be a critical to achieving those more ambitious conservation targets by 2030. This is where we think there could be really substantial gains. What do we mean by significant biodiversity? Dan and I and many others work together on defining OECMs. And reluctantly, they wouldn't let me define my garden, which I manage for wildlife, as an OECM. So it doesn't count. We're really looking for areas with rare, threatened or endangered species, key biodiversity areas, areas that are representative of natural ecosystems, areas with a high level of ecological integrity, with a full range of native species, areas important for range-restricted species and ecosystems, important species aggregations, areas especially important for species life stages such as feeding, resting, breeding, areas important for ecological connectivity or to complete a conservation network. Also areas that provide critical ecosystem services such as carbon storage, as well as biodiversity conservation. And going forward, it may be areas that give us both biodiversity conservation and other important ecosystem services where we get the most traction and the most gains, so that when we're protecting those areas, we will be addressing both climate change and biodiversity issues. So with intensively managed farms will not likely be an OECM, but an area of native grassland with diverse native birds and mammals might be an OECM if it has low intensity management. The outcomes are what matters. Biodiversity outcomes long term. Quality, not quantity. Again, what are likely areas? Some indigenous community conserved areas, some watershed protection areas, some community pastures with native prairie, some coastal and marine areas protected for reasons other than conservation, but not disturbed. It's very unlikely that most urban parks and other formal gardens would qualify, though some may indeed have large areas set aside for wildlife and wild habitats. Temporary fishing closures would not count if they're only in place until an overfished area recovers. Heavily grazed grasslands or grasslands replanted with monocultures would not count. Large landscape or seascape scale management policies targeting a limited number of elements, for instance, fishing or hunting restrictions, would not count. Even production forests managed for logging at a commercial scale would not count, even though they may have some biodiversity values. And it's really important the potential areas should be screened very carefully on a case-by-case basis. Again, what we're looking for is quality, long-term biodiversity outcomes, not just quantity. This is important because governments love to tick the box and say we make the targets. IUCN itself has passed various resolutions. These apply both to protected areas and OECMs. So environmentally damaging industrial activities and infrastructure developments should not occur in protected areas or OECMs. I'm sure the audience could give me lots of examples of where they are happening, but they shouldn't be. That's the IUCN position. Most areas managed for industrial scale production, even if they have some biodiversity benefits, shouldn't be considered as OECMs. As Dan emphasized, we're all for more sustainable management in the rest of the world, but areas that are under sustainable use should be recorded against sustainable use targets, not all counted in the conservation target. So sustainably managed commercial forests, for instance, should have been reported under IHE Target 7, or going forward post-2020 under other sustainable use targets. OECMs can have a broad range of governance types, just like protected areas. They can be government managed, privately managed and governed by Indigenous people and local communities, or they can be shared governance. And this is important because many OECMs will not be government managed. They will be managed by some of these other players. And it's important to know that and to understand why they are delivering effective conservation. And what, if anything, do we need to do to make sure that that continues? Is that giving better support to Indigenous people and local communities, recognizing land tenure, access rights, providing incentives like payments to ecosystem services? This is a whole interesting area that we need to explore. WCPA has put together some important documents on other effective area-based conservation measures. We have a technical report on recognizing and reporting OECMs, which gives the basic screening tool. This document was very much done in collaboration with the CBD over a number of years. All the material in it was reviewed by parties, and much of it has been incorporated in the international guidance through the CBD. This really was a case where IUCN and WCPA contributed to international policy making. We now are developing a step-by-step methodology for use at the site level. We'd love to have it tested in more areas. This is just one example of the work that the Commission does. If anyone watching is interested in working more with WCPA on these and other issues, then you should go online, ask to become a WCPA member, and then list which of these groups you would like to join. We would welcome more young people joining WCPA. We need your energy and enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, also for providing us with all this information about OECM that are something that not many people are aware of. So thank you very much. That was really comprehensive and a complete overview of also the potential of these areas, but also the things that we should be aware of. I know that Italy is planning to declare all their territorial water as OECM, which are not all actually in some way contributing to conservation of biodiversity. So thank you very much. It's really important to take also this opportunity to provide useful information for protected area practitioners and early career conservationists. So let me just switch now to another big pillar of this session, which is the engagement of the next generation of conservation leaders. And there is no one that is better than Krista to take us to the journey, into this journey, and also introduce us to some case studies. Today I'm a bit tired, and so it's getting harder to present everyone. But let me introduce to Krista Valentino, that founded Coalition Wild in 2013 on the recognition that youth leadership in conservation an untapped potential for positive change. She continues to be an international reference and advocate for the integration and support of youth in leadership and decision making about the planet. With a decade of experience navigating collaboration with global environmental leaders and fostering grassroots community action, Krista works bridges the gap found between generation, cultures, and tactics to bring about sustained change for the future. This has motivated her to work towards her master in global leadership at Royal Roads University that she's doing right now, but she's also been a leading force behind the young professional engagement and meaningful involvement within IUCN. So thank you, Krista, for joining us today, and I let you go on with your presentation.
Thank you, Maria Sole, and thank you everyone for joining. So as Maria Sole said, I'm Krista Valentino, and I'm the founder and director of Coalition Wild, which back in 2013, we began because we recognized that there was a lack of a platform for young people to be engaged and get connected and to feel like active participants in the decision-making about the planet. So young people were doing great work all around the world, and they were on the ground in communities, getting their hands dirty, and their work was making a difference. But 8 years ago, much of those efforts were not only going unnoticed and unsupported, but they were going unheard. Worse, the spaces where conversations were happening on how to protect nature and biodiversity lacked not only a youth perspective, but youth input and youth buy-in. We just heard about the traditional conservation and protected area management tactics from Dan and Kathy, and how these tactics have allowed us to protect and conserve our natural wild spaces to this point. And many of them will continue to need to employ as we move ahead to protect at least 30% on the road to protecting half the planet. And again, these measures are important. But as we begin seeing our global society shift in the way that we interact, in the information that we have access to, in the methods that we engage with, and in the demographic that is beginning to take up that charge, we must begin considering what it means to protect nature in new and innovative ways. In 2010, 50% of the world's population was under the age of 30. And this number continues to increase as our global demographic gets younger. We're also more connected than ever before. We have technological advances that come up every day that not only allow us to feel tethered to people on the other side of the globe, but it also allows us to feel tethered to the places we may never visit, to feel the effects of disaster or degradation in communities that aren't our own. And it makes us feel compelled to act for species and wilds as deep as the ocean floors and as high as Everest base camps, because we're living in this time of transition where no longer can countries and regions and people work in silos against global threats like climate change or pandemics. And global governance structures like the UN or like the IUCN find themselves only able to reach so far so quickly. So we need inclusion. And We need new and innovative ways to protect nature. But what if those new and innovative ways were to meaningfully invest in that 50% of our population? What if protecting nature and starting with supporting youth and their engagement in leading for the planet was that new and innovative way? Where once the typical method of advancement towards leadership looked like starting in entry level or in volunteer positions, working your way up the ladder, and eventually, after years in the system, being given the role of leadership and influence. Today, young people who I've already mentioned are quickening their pace to securing the majority of the population. They're not only realizing that they don't have time to wait, but they also are lacking the willingness to do so. And this isn't a bad thing. Threats against nature and biodiversity are absolutely a global problem, but how they are affecting communities vary widely. In some areas, sea levels are rising. In other, wildfires rage. For many Indigenous peoples, their fight is against the encroachment of their native lands and cultures. I'm sure each of you who are sitting here can think of something that is facing your community that is unique to you and where you live. Couple these unique challenges with an impatience, and young people are finding ways to step into action leadership, paying no mind to the idea of waiting their turn in line. Coalition Wild is working to harness this impatience while honoring the autonomy, that is the ability to do what you are doing by choice, and realizing that this is the most powerful driver to produce meaningful results. There's a whole study out there, and if you want to learn more about this fact of autonomy, look up the 1977 research by Edward Decky and Richard Ryan that shows in every situation, autonomous motivation throttles extrinsic or external motivation. So when Coalition Wild started our accelerator program, we needed to make sure young people were doing what they were doing because of interest and enjoyment, and because it aligned with their values and their beliefs. Those are factors that, if we're doing it correctly, we as program leaders, me as Coalition Wild, me as Krista Valentino, cannot create or decide for a young person how they get involved or what the projects they are working on are or what they care or believe in. They must come with their own ideas and their own ways of working. So our 9-month action leadership trainings are built upon giving young people who already have the drive, who already have passion, who already have a desire to get involved. And we give them the autonomy to choose where to direct that energy. We give them a safe place, a place filled with peers who are living similar experiences and mentors who are equipped to support them. And we give them the encouragement to bolster their confidence within themselves. We give them the safe place to try out these ideas they have on how to solve a challenge in their community, or to bring people together to rally behind a cause, to protect their lands and waters and cultures, but most importantly, to believe that whatever way they believe is the right way to do so, it is. So how then can so many people be leading change, and not just superficial change, but real, deep, meaningful change that's actually creating long-term benefits at such a young age? The answer lies within our need to redefine what it means to have experience. At one time, learning came from textbooks and experience came from on-the-job trainings. But in today's world, in our world where the effects of our overtaxed and underloved environment is literally knocking at our doors every morning, learning is coming from social media videos. It's coming from WhatsApp groups. It's coming from virtual gatherings like this one. And experience is coming from navigating these realities from the moment we wake up. Experience is no longer able to be defined as resume relevant time on the clock. Yet in many sectors and in many decision-making areas, a young person's relevance is undervalued because of this antiquated view of how we define their contribution. As the acknowledgement of the necessity of youth engagement and interaction increases, young people are being asked more and more to often join advisory boards and councils, or offer their insights and perspectives into program building, to contribute to research and studies, and even to present at highly visible conferences about the work that they're doing. And although the trend is meaningfully moving away from tokenism, still these roles are often asked to be performed without compensation. In fact, often the phrase that is said is something along the lines of, in return for your time, participants will receive experience. Well, if we consider that a person, any of us here, has been gathering experience since the moment we are born, and if the insight and expertise being asked for specifically is of the perspective of a young person as a young person, then that young person actually has experience from the moment they started living. So what's that, about 20, 30 years in that role? Degrees and titles aren't needed when simply living life has exposed many young people to more on-the-job training than a career ever could. Yet we are valuing those 30 years of, well, I guess I should ask, are we valuing those 30 years of lived experience in a 33-year-old the same way we would value 30 years of desk work experience in a 63-year-old? At this point in time, we aren't. Deliberately or not, young people are no longer waiting to be called to the front to begin to lead. They're seeing opportunity in the midst of destructive forces. They're finding what lights them up inside, and they're stepping up and speaking out for the futures they stand to inherit. They're employing today's tools, those of technology, those that are intersectional, and those that they see as connections to the greater global whole. And they're employing them under the pressure that there's no time to waste waiting. Because here's the thing, if we want to continue to move the needle towards protecting our planet into the future, we need to think beyond traditional conservation measures. We need to be innovative and creative. We need to blur the lines between for-profit and nonprofit, between social change and activism, between humanitarian aid, between education advocacy, between civilian engagement and activism. Young people are already making the shift because they have seen that setting up these barriers between sectors have gotten us to the place that we are in today, fighting the clock and scrambling for solutions. We saw it in Greta, a schoolgirl turned global activist icon. We see it in 26-year-old young champion of the earth, Lefteris Arpakis, a multi-generational Greek fisherman turned clean sea advocate who is removing 1.5 tons, that's 3,300 pounds, of plastic waste from the sea each week. We see it in Angola's 32-year-old Johnny Costa, who worked with the Lucchese people in eastern Angolan highlands and on the Okavango Delta with community-based conservation work, and then was appointed to the Minister of Culture, Tourism, and Environment for the country. And we see it in our next two speakers, Dore and Yuriko Yurupe. Dore is a child of a ranger from Benin who grew up with a passion for nature conservation. In 2015, he coordinated the WCPA Young Professionals Group in West and Central Africa, which resulted in almost 200 volunteers from 15 countries contributing to the mandate of the IUCN and the WCPA at regional, national, and local levels. He's been working for several years to reshape conservation around communities, believing that successful conservation cannot happen without them. And he will be speaking now about his experience in the Lake Chad region. So Dore, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Krista, for your kind words and for inviting me to join this panel. I guess that you can see my slide and hear my voice. Excellent.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, excellent. It's always a difficult exercise to intervene after such great speakers and more complex to inspire change makers, people who are already making great impact in this call at local, national, and international level. Next, please. Today I will be talking about this transboundary landscape shared by Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Chad. If I ask some of you in this call, what do you know about the Lake Chad region? I'm pretty sure that most of the answer we will receive will reflect this negative perception I had 3 years ago before starting actively working in this transboundary landscape. People will think about this lake, which is going to disappear in the next 10, 20, or 30 years due to the impact of climate change. People also have this image of poverty, community dying of hunger, and more recently, armed conflicts, insecurity, and terrorism, with Boko Haram operating in the entire landscape. Next, please. This is partly the truth. And when I joined the World Heritage Center of UNESCO 3 years ago, I found out that the organization is really thinking about how heritage, natural heritage, and cultural values can really be used as driver for sustainable development. How they could empower those communities, how they can use heritage to promote peace, social inclusion. But nobody wanted to go there. Who wants to kind of risk his or her life for communities living in the Lake Chad region? In September 2018, I took the risk, of course, with a heavy military escort you can see, to go and visit this landscape. And in the picture in the middle, you can even see the sign of shooting. And for some of you in this call who know a little bit this landscape, we can see Boso, where it's supposed to be the headquarters of Boko Haram kidnapping people. But I took my courage and I went a little bit beyond. Next, please. And I discovered also this amazing biodiversity. I never really imagined that in this landscape, I could still find viable population of elephants, birds, but also this beautiful landscape. And we conservationists, generally, we stick to the biodiversity, and we want to promote the narrative that we should protect those landscapes because we have beautiful elephants, the landscape is amazing. But I decided to go one step more, please, and I discovered this community full of hope, knowledgeable, and they challenge a little bit the knowledge we had about the landscape. They had solution to build this innovation, to support this social inclusion and to promote the sustainable development we wanted to do in Paris based at UNESCO headquarters. I also discovered next a rare and unique product, what I would call later the green gold, spirulina, the best ever we can find in this world. And we decided later, and we'll see it in the next slide, to use it as a driver for sustainable development and community empowerment. Going back to Paris, I share a little bit what I found in the ground, but we know, you know, in those organizations, big machines, we always have seniors, people, they don't really want to change narrative because they have fixed knowledge about situation, state of conservation of particular places. I decided first to work hardly, even against the system, to change the narrative of the Lake Chad region, but also to tackle the security and community resilience pillar, because security, armed conflict cannot today be dissociated with community livelihoods. And also discover some scientific evidence by discussing with those communities. And I decided also to work on this pillar to show the world, the international community, that what we were thinking about the Lake Chad, it's partially wrong. Next, please. To be able to change this narrative around Lake Chad, I know, and be able to change the narrative about the negative narrative about a place, it's a really long-term process. But I decided to start. And I organized a virtual exposition to really showcase the untapped potential of Lake Chad. And this exhibition took place end of 2019 at the headquarters of UNESCO, visited by more than 5,000 people, attended by ministers from the 4 countries. When they discover the potential of the various countries, they decided to move forward to inscribe the Lake Chad cultural landscape as a World Heritage Site. And this was great because it will help to strengthen the transboundary cooperation between the 4 countries, but to improve the dialogue with local communities. And this happened within 1 year. The Lake Chad cultural landscape was inscribed on the tentative list of the 4 countries, and this never happened in the past. And this was a great achievement because it's the first time in the history of the convention for the Africa region that we can have a transboundary landscape shared by 4 countries, Francophone, Anglophone, between West and Central Africa, inscribed on the World Heritage List as a cultural landscape. After this key milestone, they decided to push a little bit more their commitment and dialogue with local communities to have a complete and finalized dossier submitted at the World Heritage Center. And this was also done in January. And the evaluation process is actually ongoing and will help at the end to have the Lake Chad cultural landscape inscribed on the World Heritage List. And this will be a great achievement. That means that we have an outstanding universal value there, natural and cultural. I will not have time during this presentation to go in detail regarding those values, but I will feel free to answer any question I may have regarding those values. Next, please. And as I was saying, I discovered spirulina. And while discussing with those communities, I found out that spirulina, this green algae, this gold can be used to improve communities' livelihoods. And we just try to organize women entrepreneurs already working for this activity in 4 groups to help them to use and valorize spirulina to create jobs. First of all, for those women, actually we have around 100 jobs created for those women. And through this activity, they will be able to generate almost $700 per year. And this revenue can really help them to help their kids to go to school. This will have, of course, an impact on the security because people are joining those terrorist groups because they don't have job. They are jobless. They don't have something to do. But if they have enough resources, we are capable to improve their livelihood. We are sure that we can also tackle the security issue. Next. And using my background in business, I developed the business model. And you can see here the executive summary. I'm not going in details of figure because people in conservation generally don't like to talk about business, but it's important if we really want to have impact. And the operation links to these activities actually are taken care by UNESCO and African Development Bank. And this activity, this assistance to communities are actually ongoing, and we can already see the impact of our commitment and our engagement in the Lake Chad region. Next, please. Regarding the scientific evidence, the narrative shared actually internationally is this lake is going to disappear in the next 30 years. And we found out with the local communities that is not the truth. This lake is full of water. And we partner with EAD, it's a French scientific organization, and we share those information we collected from the fields. We share the narrative from the communities, and they decided to go themselves to the field and collect data to see exactly what is happening. And they came to the same conclusion with us. The lake is not going to disappear. The lake is full of water. The lake may face other human impacts, but this lake is not going to disappear. And we have a link of this publication. Unfortunately, it's only in French. If you have time, please go and read this publication. But when we share those information at international level, people didn't want to accept it because we have many organizations raising money based on false information. We have today many organizations in Africa and in Europe, of course, raising money to support communities to fight climate change because they are saying this lake is very important, and if we don't protect this lake due to climate change impacts, communities there are going to suffer. But this is not the reality. The reality today is we should really work and invest resources to support community livelihood instead of continue raising money based on false narrative. Next, please. My takeaway and my message from this experience is still ongoing, is we really need to put communities back at the heart of conservation to address the economic, security, health, ecological, and humanitarian crises today in the Lake Chad region. And it's not only for the Lake Chad region. We have also today security crisis in the Ali complex between Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We all know the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have East Africa, we have Manovo-Gunda. But if we really don't develop this strong partnership with communities, we can really make sure that all the effort we are putting to protect our protected, conserved, and other areas are not going to be successful. We are going to lose decades of effort if we don't build strong partnership with communities. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have. Over to you, Krista.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And if you can't tell from a chat, everyone is highly impressed and excited about the work you are doing and how important it is to work with communities towards conservation efforts. So thank you. So next, I'd like to introduce Yuriko, who's another example of how blurring the lines between filmmaking and conservation lead to community education and activism on a scale neither of them could produce singularly. Yuriko is a Peruvian biologist based in Lima who joined the scientific expedition within the Manu Biosphere Reserve research and the Pacaya Samiria, sorry if I mispronounced that, National Reserve in the Peruvian Amazon. She has an interest in conservation communications and regularly contributes articles and to online blogs, and then joined the Voices on the Road Impact Campaign in 2020. It's a project co-funded by the IUCN NL and the Otter Foundation, which is an award-winning independent documentary about Indigenous rights and rainforest conservation in the Manu Biosphere Reserve. Over to you, Yuriko.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the WCPA team, and thank you everyone who is here attending this nice talk. As Krista mentioned, I am the Impact Campaign Coordinator for the documentary Voices on the Road, filmed in the Manu Biosphere Reserve in 2018. During this role, and that I have been working in the region of Manu, I have learned many things. But the most important is what I want to share today with you. It's how listening to communities can be a decisive factor for the success or failure of natural protected areas. So let's start by finding out where the Manu Biosphere Reserve is. As you can see from the map, it's located in the southeastern of the Peruvian Amazon. And it's said to be in a privileged location because, as we can see better in this picture, it's surrounded by other natural protected areas. And until recently, it was a very difficult area to access. This allowed the ecosystem, as well as the cultural and biological diversity, to be in a very good state of conservation, and made Manu of an area of global importance, which is why it has been recognized by the UNESCO as a natural World Heritage Site. So for a long time, the Manu Biosphere Reserve has been considered like a gem of natural protected areas in Peru. It's a symbol of conservation, and it's one of the most biodiverse areas, not only in Peru, but in the world. Just as an example of this, more than 3,000 species of butterflies have been found in a small place in Manu. But it's also important for the great cultural diversity it harbors. Manu is home to indigenous groups in contact and voluntary isolation who maintain their own languages and culture. It's also home to migrants and even foreigners. So all of this makes Manu both cultural and socially complex. But Manu has also another side, which is far from beauty and exuberance. Manu is currently affected by activities that are threatening its integrity, such as illegal logging, mining, drug trafficking, which in addition to causing environmental damage, bring and increase other social and cultural problems. This occurs in the midst of great social inequality and poverty that affects the native communities of Manu. There is a great lack of access to basic services, such as drinking water, health and quality education. There is a great need to cover these deficiencies, which also leads to the construction of unsustainable infrastructure, identified as one of the causes of deforestation in the region. Among the infrastructure is the construction of roads, as an example, without roads that are built without an adequate environmental impact assessment, as is the case of the Manu Road. The Manu Road crosses the buffer zone of the Manu Biosphere Reserve and was the subject of the documentary Voices on the Road. In 2018, Ayla, Beth and Jenny, my co-workers and friends, went to investigate in the communities why they were asking for a road, despite all the dangers it could bring. What they filmed in a 23-minute documentary released in August 2020. Now I am going to share with you the trailer of the documentary, but I'd invite you to watch the full documentary, which is available on Vimeo. The link will be provided to you via chat. So let's play the trailer now.
O sea, bonitos cuando nosotros hablamos Parque Nacional del Manu, pulmón del mundo. Pero en el pulmón del mundo, ahí la gente se está muriéndose de hambre.
Seres humanos que necesitan tener una calidad de vida. Y eso es lo que pedimos, calidad de vida.
Esta riqueza, todo esto es de ustedes, de sus hijos. Y eso prohíbe hacer una carretera. Por eso hay que luchar.
Dicen que con la carretera van a mejorar su situación de vida. ¿Pero de qué manera? Es mentira.
Esa es la zona roja, lo que está en peligro.
As you could see in the trailer, there are different reactions for the road for people. Some of them are afraid of the road and oppose it, while others fervently defend it and cling to it as the only hope. For conservationists and people who care about nature, the road will bring many environmental and social problems, which is true. But for many the people who live there day to day, the road has been presented as the only way for them to improve their economy and quality of life. And it has been these communities who have actively fought for the approval of the road, largely motivated by their local authorities who seem to have other economic interests. But these communities have been a decisive factor in the approval of the construction of this road, and they have not wanted to hear other alternatives because they have not been listening to for years. So, and here comes my self-criticism as a conservationist. Where have we been? I know there are many conservation institutions that do incredible work. I have worked with some of them, but has it been enough? I don't think so. So as you can see in these slides, there is some claims, and many people believe that. Just imagine the level of disconnection with conservation in believing that the biosphere reserve belongs to outsiders rather than to themselves. However, it's not so surprising. For a long time, they have been discriminated against for their beliefs and the way they live. And unfortunately, many professionals believe that we know the right way to do conservation. And perhaps we also think we are engaging communities by giving them jobs and opportunities. But my question is, are we really listening to them? When we started the impact campaign, before the pandemic, we had planned to come back to the communities, to thank them and provide different workshops. However, as you well know, that was impossible. We had to find other ways to achieve our main objective, which was to generate positive impacts to protect communities from the negative impacts of the road. And that's where Coalition-wide came in, because for me personally, it was a new challenge. I needed help, and I found it in Coalition-wide. As part of the income package, we started to bring to attention to the public. So just in the start of the campaign, we received a letter from David Attenborough. You have heard of him, I'm sure. But more important than that, the documentary was published in several site news, Peruvian and foreign news sites. And we participated also in workshops, festivals, talks. We ignite debate with students, young students, as much as we could. And during that time, it was almost impossible to contact the communities, but recently they have gotten access to the internet and we can finally communicate. And several things have changed. Some of them for the better, some of them for the bad. But the most important thing for us now with the impact campaign is to strengthen our relationship with the communities and look for solutions and strategies together that will help them to protect themselves from the negative impacts of the road. There are impacts that are already becoming visible, such as insecurity for women and girls, as well as land grabbing. But the good news is that they are willing to find sustainable ways to improve their life quality. And there is a lot to do, but we know now we will take the time needed to listen and understand their needs first before to amplify their voices to the world. And what role do young people play? I believe that young people, and by this, I mean the soul, I have always believed that youth is carried in the soul more than in the age. We young people have a superpower, and that is the ability to empathize more easily. I believe that we have not yet let our preconceived ideas overcome us, and we are always open to new perspectives. Let's use this to the benefit of nature. Let's try to empathize more with communities that nobody listens to. And if there are a couple of things I have learned during this time is, first, it's okay to doubt yourself. What's not okay is to stay doubting and do nothing to prove to yourself that you can improve or acquire certain skill. And second of all, it's never enough, but it's never too little. Celebrate your small achievements. The change you are making may be invisible even to yourself, but believe me, the most significant change you will see in a long term. And finally, you can always follow us in social media. The impact campaign is still happening. So here in the slides, you can see our website link, and that will also be shared in the chat inbox. And you can follow us in different social media. Here you also see our emails. We are always open to hear new perspectives and new people who want to be involved in this. And that will be me. That will be all for me. So gracias and thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuriko. That was really outstanding. And also Dode's presentation and Krista inside. I feel so inspired by all your experience and the stories that you have been sharing with us today. So thank you very much. I have also the pleasure to mention that Krista and Dode played a key role also in the Young Professional Network of WCPA. Dode has been for many years our reference for Central and West Africa, and Krista is still our reference point for North America. So this is the beauty also of the Young Professional Network. Young professional are people that approach also conservation in a new way, in some way, but they still benefit from the important knowledge sharing that senior people can provide. And this is the approach that we take in WCPA. It's about intergenerational cooperation and knowledge sharing. And it's about highlighting the inspiring stories of young people, young professional, early career professional, making the difference for nature conservation around the world. And we just had really some outstanding example there. And I'm so grateful that you join us today and share your inspiring stories with us. So thank you very much from all my heart, but I feel like I'm sharing the feeling of many people that commented also in the chat. So thank you very much for that. Many people ask if they could access the presentation, and we will make the PDF available for the people that will write down their email on the chat box. And Marie-Philippe, who has been our lighthouse for the organization of this session. Let me thank her from all our heart as well, because she has been fantastic in helping us to organize the whole session. She will make sure you receive also the presentation. So thank you, Marie-Philippe, and thanks to Parks Canada for providing also the resources for us in terms of human resources in this case to make this happen. So thank you very much. We had a couple of questions that were shared with us in the chat box. We are running a little bit beyond the schedule, just 40 minutes beyond schedule. So we will just ask a few questions. One, Kathy, is for you, and I will take also this opportunity to ask you if you have any feedback and comment on the session. But the question is, and this is something that also was touch base a lot in the presentation of Eurico. The question is, how are indigenous communities and indigenous knowledge included in the decision and recommendation for protected areas by the WCPA?
Well, thanks for that question. It's especially relevant, in fact, to OECMs as well. So, like we said, protected areas can be managed by any of these groups of people. Indeed, there are many indigenous reserves recently created in Colombia that are managed by indigenous people. In Australia, you've got indigenous reserves also, a lot of them, where there's some kinds of co-management agreement. Within WCPA, of course, we're very keen to promote greater integration and engagement with all kinds of protected area professionals and players. And I include community members, indigenous people in that group. Also, as you know, we've got this new alliance for rangers. I don't know if any of you saw the Ranger award system, but some of those rangers are community rangers, indigenous rangers, and we're looking there, how can we strengthen their welfare, help to professionalize their work, and also provide codes of conduct for how rangers, government agencies, work with indigenous people. So there's quite a lot of work going on. There is social assessments going on. There are new tools being developed to look at governance models. And if you're particularly interested in this topic, I really encourage you to look on our website and the CEAS website. There's also some guidance under preparation at the moment for how protected area managers, particularly government protected area managers, should be working with communities where the protected areas and the ICCAs overlap. So there's a lot going on. Of course, we recognize that FPIC is crucial in all of these conversations. But I really want to say how inspiring it was to listen to these two last presentations, and particularly Eureka's, because I think it emphasized very clearly what the trade-offs and tensions are. And it's really a challenge. You know, how can you conserve some of these areas or help people who are already conserving them when they also need economic opportunities, livelihoods, and you have these competing demands. Agencies, commercial firms that are perhaps promising a lot, which may or may not be realized. So I thought the two presentations emphasized extremely well some of the issues that we're all trying to work with for more just and equitable conservation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I have another question, and I think that maybe both Dode and Dan could reply to that. And the question is how we can balance demand for economic growth and protected areas management, since protected areas host huge natural resources that support development. I think that Dode, you touch base a little bit on the economic argument as well on protected areas. That is also a social argument, but also I think that Dan can provide a little bit an overview also on the whole fisheries aspect in marine protected areas. So please, Dode, start, and then I let Dan integrate with the marine perspective.
Thank you very much, Maria Sol. And this question is so relevant, and it's why I just did a conservation MBA to see how we can link conservation and the business world. Because when we take basically the map of the protected areas in Africa, they are overlapping with the map of the mining and the natural resources. So where we are really putting our effort to protect those landscapes, private sector also is coming in because they want to take gold, all those natural resources. We need to develop partnership, open partnership, engage communities, and we should, as conservationists, and this is something I have learned, you know, since I did my conservation MBA, we should not be afraid by the private sectors. They are partners. Local communities, we should not say that they don't have knowledge. We have strong knowledge there. So how are we going to develop those win-win partnership so that we can keep protecting our protected and conserved areas, generating revenue to really improve communities' livelihood, but also bring private sector. I'm not saying all private companies are good for conservation, but some of them are willing really to listen. And sometimes they are acting because they don't have the right information. But if we're afraid to talk with them, we cannot provide them with the right information. So we should not be afraid to sit and say, engage the dialogue with private sector and local community. This will be my takeaway. Thank you.
If I can perhaps add on to that, I think when you look at the ocean as a whole, one of the smartest things we could start doing is stop funding damage, especially by the few, because it is compromising the future of the many. I think we also need to properly value, as I said, the ocean economically, and that means also the people dependent on it. You know, I mean, I'm fairly sick and tired when we get these really big storm events to hear about the loss of and damage to property from the insurance companies, and yet you never hear about the plight of all the individuals whose lives have been disrupted, other than in rescue and welfare, rather than actually valuing them and valuing and supporting them in those processes. I think, we know what we need to do. And I think it really is about enlightened self-interest, and it is about, the ambition to do things. If you think that the first vaccine for COVID was done in 300 days, it would have taken a decade before then. We can do these things. It's not beyond the wit of humans to be able to work out how to get out of these things, but we've got to actually see that even though we think we're independent from evolution, like we build airplanes so we can fly, we're totally dependent on this planet, totally integrated with this planet. And we need to all work together. And it is particularly, this is why I've been such a supporter of young professionals for so many years. It is us working together as intergenerational communities that are going to solve this and put the pressure on the political system to change its thinking from short term and profit to understanding about sustainability. So we need to try and do things differently. We need to look at different models. We need to be experimental, but we also need to act.
I 100% agree. And Krista, I saw also a lot of support for Coalition Wild. Someone is suggesting to start a clubhouse room of Coalition Wild. Do you have any final, let's say, input into this discussion and also feedback?
Yeah, I think this entire panel and presentation has shown that there's a lot of ways to protect nature. There's traditional conservation measures, and there's maybe non-traditional or new aged ways of working. And all of them are relevant and all of them are important. We need veteran conservationists, people who've been in the field for 40, 50, 60 years, who have experience. We also need new eyes and new energy involved as well. It isn't one against the other. It isn't nonprofit versus for-profit. It isn't organizations versus communities. It's a combination of all of them. And the more we recognize the importance of working as those global connected communities, the further we're going to be able to go and the faster we're going to be able to get there. So I would just say that I feel that this panel is a really good example of an indication of how we all can be and should be working in the ways that we can do it best, whether that's say within the IUCN in the system or in communities and everything in between. And it's really about finding your place, finding your influence and knowing what you're able to do and going out and doing it and knowing that it contributes to the greater whole.
I really love that, and I think that those are really valuable opportunities for all of us, also as young professionals, to interact with each other, to share maybe common frustration, to support each other, to inspire each other, because this is, I think, the most important thing, at least in my personal experience, that I received from benefiting of being part of such a network of outstanding individual and inspiring people. So this really helps, and in some way, when you benefit from those experiences, you want others to benefit as well. And in this context with WCPA, we've been working a lot to facilitate the integration of young professionals within the Commission, but also with opportunities. For example, with Coalition Wild, and thanks to your work, Krista, we managed to implement in 2018 was, right? The Coalition Wild mentorship program within WCPA. So we really were able to set up couples between senior leaders and young professionals, and have a year mentorship guided by Coalition Y. So this is one of the opportunity. Another opportunity is also actually meeting in real person, in physically, as we had the opportunity to do in the World Parks Congress before, but also the World Conservation Congress. And I have to say that WCPA is one of maybe the only commission in IUCN that always has a budget for the Congress to support people from many region of our global world to attend the Congress, and this really allows us to form good working relationship and also friendship that have proven to be also very very important working relationship. We produce document like the Growing Our Reach. I saw Tom also join us, Sondra, other people from WCPA that actively contribute to providing other opportunities for young professionals to get involved, but also to be meaningfully involved and engaged in nature conservation. So I think we did a lot. I hope we influenced a little bit also IUCN in that sense. We worked hard. So it's now up to the next generation of young professionals to keep the good work. And I'm sure that this will happen, especially by being a guest of the Global Youth Summit. This is already a huge success, and for sure the highlight to the World Conservation Congress. So I would like to thank all the participants, and really thank you for joining us today. Any final statement from anyone? No. So thank you very much. Thank you all. You've been so inspiring, and thank you for the many people that attended the question, for your comment and input, and the session. And the recording of the session will be available on the Global Youth no, that's another one. The Global Youth Summit and the WUVA app in maximum 1 or 2 weeks, only for participants. So you will be able to see the session, the recording of the session, and for those of you that have provided your email, Marie-Philippe will make sure to send you also the PDF of the presentation. I just would like to end by calling Marie-Philippe a little bit to show herself, because we wanted really to
I'm here.
So thank you so much.
Thanks to you. That was a great session. Congrats.
Thank you.
Inspiring.
Thank you for making it happen, and thanks to the tech support as well. Thank you for everyone that is working behind the scene to make this happen. So thank you very much, and let's keep up the good work for protected areas and for young professionals. Bye.
Bye-bye.